Welcome to the 83rd episode of the New Ventures podcast. I am your host, Sanjoy Sanyal, the founder of Regain Paradise, a boutique climate finance firm and a visiting fellow at the Cambridge Judge Business School. Along with my co-host, Professor Jaideep Prabhu, we try and understand the links between climate change and food security in these series of conversations.
Hi, I'm Jaideep Prabhu. I'm a professor of marketing at Cambridge Judge Business School. My area of interest is innovation, more specifically frugal innovation, how to do more and better with less. And it's through that interest that I have become interested in food security and climate change. Delighted to be with you on this podcast.
Our guest for today is Joshua Chella, joining us from Lusaka, Zambia. Joshua is the business development lead of Kvuno, an organization that works with smallholder farmers in Malawi, Mozambique, South Africa, and Zambia. Welcome, Joshua.
Thank you very much, Sanjoy and Jaideep. It's a pleasure to be part of the podcast and very excited to be here today.
Joshua, I wonder if we could start with your background. Can you let us know a little bit about yourself?
So, as rightly stated, my name is Joshua Chella, and I am a resident in Lusaka, Zambia. For some of our listeners that might not be familiar with where Zambia is, so Zambia is a country that's in the central part of Southern Africa. Beautiful country with the largest mammal migration, the place where you find the largest bat migration in the world. Over 20 million people in terms of our population. And with regards to my background, I did my undergraduate at the University of Zambia. I studied agricultural sciences with a major in agricultural economics. And currently, I am pursuing my executive MBA in leadership and wealth creation with the University of Lusaka.
Lovely. And it's great that you're doing your executive education course in business. You had previously worked also in agricultural finance, right, Joshua?
Yes, that's correct. In terms of my history around agricultural finance, it's interesting in the sense that it hasn't been from the financial institution's perspective, but it's been more of trying to understand the needs of the smallholder farmers in Zambia and Southern Africa as a whole, but also extended to the SMEs that are operating in the agricultural space. And my history has been, first of all, working with the private sector, using the market systems approach to try and de-risk the initial investment into agricultural enterprises in the rural sector, lowering the risk of initial investment. But I've also worked around helping to build the capacity of the SMEs to be able to access finance from the commercial lending institutions. And with Kvuno, I have also helped to develop and deploy an agricultural financing service for smallholder farmers, which we call Malimbeu. And this simply means money is seed, trying to understand how different models can work for the smallholder farmers to access finance.
Joshua, can you tell us a bit more about Kvuno?
Kvuno is a word derived from Swahili, which means bringing in the harvest. And Kvuno is a social inclusive business that was incubated by Solidaridad Southern Africa. Our role is really to utilize digital tools and technologies to empower smallholder farmers for wealth creation through farming. We have a tagline at Kvuno, which we say, wealth to the farmers. Our mission is to uplift and enable smallholder farmers to generate sustainable wealth through affordable technologies and bundled services. But of course, with the vision of being the driving force that supports farmers in achieving their full business potential.
Joshua, I was in Zambia in March. We didn't meet actually, but because you were at the in the field, visiting the farmers. Could you tell us a little bit about your role? And also, I'm particularly curious to know, what you saw in Zambia at the peak of the drought in March.
I'll start with my role. On a day-to-day basis, picking from our values as Kvuno, which are being an adaptable, collaborative, innovative, integrity-filled, and transparent organization, I normally get to have a day where I interact with our field agents, trying to understand and listen to the needs of our farmers. But at the same time, we look for collaborative partners that will help to solve the needs of the farmers and develop innovations that address those needs. At the peak of the drought, it was interesting, but in an unfortunate way, the challenges that our farmers were going through. This is one of the worst droughts that we've had in the past 10 years. So, unlike the recent droughts that we've had in the past, this one was one in which some of our farmers did experience total crop failure. But then I wouldn't really say we have experienced the full impact of the drought, because we are still seeing some of the effects of the drought, such as an erosion of the wealth that was built by most of the smallholder farmers, some for the past 5 years and more, being lost in one season. So it was an unfortunate experience. And even now, as we visit farmers in the field, we still see some of these effects of the drought, and especially with regards to availability of food. But more concerning is the ability for our farmers to really kickstart this coming farming season, because they lost most of the inputs, the output, and then what they're wondering is, how do we start? Where do we start from? And how do we move forward from this current situation that we're in?
In some ways, it was known, like in, say, March 2023, that you were going to see a beginning of an El Nino cycle. If you could go back to then, what would you say are some things that you could have done then to prepare for this period?
Yes, it was known that there'll be an El Nino, but as I said, in the recent past, we've had some dry spells, some droughts here and there, but not to the extent that we experienced this particular year when we had total crop failure, the severity of this one. And so the information was there, but I think most of the farmers hoped that we would have shorter dry spells and they'll still get some harvest. And I say this, by the way, a lot of farmers planted, you could tell that they anticipated for a normal rainy season, or at least they hoped for a good rainy season, even if we had some dry spells in the previous years. What would I do if I was to turn back the time? This is an interesting thought, and I'm sure not just in my mind, but also in the minds of most farmers. So, first and foremost, it's the intensity of the awareness campaigns. Despite having information available here and there about the drought, I think it would have been good to have more stakeholders on board communicating this message constantly to the farmers. But at the same time, it's not just about giving the farmers the information, but also giving them alternative crops to grow. Because we have had some farmers that grew crops that are climate smart and drought tolerant, such as sorghum, that fared relatively well. These are some of the things we would have done, and I think going forward should be embraced more. The aspect of incorporating drought tolerant crops and also intensifying the level of awareness and sensitization. But I think another thing is with regards to agricultural insurance. I think this is something that could have helped our farmers prevent or manage their risks had they insured some of their crops. But for the most part, agricultural insurance for smallholder farmers is a relatively new concept, and not many of them have bought into the idea, and perhaps after this drought, we'll see some of them taking up this service. But those are some of the things that could have helped.
That's really interesting, Joshua, because listening to you, I can see parallels with the other contexts, other communities that face similar challenges. You're right, it's informational. Farmers need to know, have the information on what some of the other options might be, including taking insurance or other crops. But it also seems to me behavioral in that even if you have the information sometimes, to actually change your behavior is difficult, especially if you're used to doing something over a long period of time. And so to outsiders, it might appear like they're just hoping against hope, but really they're kind of stuck in a rut. It's not just providing them information, but also probably helping them with some kind of hand holding, kind of mentoring to help them change their behavior. I wonder if you could maybe comment on that observation.
At Kvuno, we have noticed from our work with smallholder farmers that adopting a new practice is something that doesn't happen overnight. It's something that requires farmers to appreciate the reason for the change, because most of our farmers are traditional in the sense that the farming practices that they've been using have been passed on from one generation to the next. And so, if an innovation or something new is communicated to them, they really need, as you've put it rightly, hand holding. But as Kvuno, we've also got a product or a service which is called Zawadi. This is an incentives program which incentivizes certain practices with rewards. And so some of our partners, such as Solidaridad, have used this to help farmers adopt new practices until farmers really see that by adopting this new practice, my production and productivity is increasing. And then beyond this reward service that incentivizes certain behaviors, they're able to adopt it and make it a part of their practice. So, yes, handholding is something that is needed, but it should also be done in a manner that is, I think, cost effective, because looking at the ratio of farmers to organizations that have got the correct agronomic service and the correct expertise, I think the ratio is a bit on the high side. And that's why at Kvuno, we try to embrace as much as possible digital innovations, which can reach out to more farmers using less manpower or in a more efficient manner, if I may put it that way.
Joshua, Jaideep and myself were reading a couple of months back this article that came out in the New York Times, which was written by both their top climate editors, climate reporters, one from New York and the other from Southern Africa, I believe. And, the article painted a terrible picture. It painted a picture of millions being put into hunger, people struggling with crocodiles to capture food. How have farmers coped? What did you see?
It's not just about this drought that we experienced, Sanjoy, but it's also about the other droughts previously experienced. And most of our farmers do keep livestock, and we like to call livestock as banks on four legs, because in an event where farmers experience, normally they would tend to sell their livestock to feed their families, take their children to schools, and also meet their day-to-day expenses. And it's not unheard of that in a drought year such as this one, where farmers take their livestock to drink water from water bodies like rivers, which are infested with crocodiles, could have losses from crocodile attacks because water levels are quite low at the moment. And with low water levels, you tend to have a lot of incidents such as crocodile attacks on livestock and things like that.
We are now into a new planting season, and I know you already said earlier that we are not seeing the full effects as of now. I mean, people may not have the proper inputs for the next farming season. Children may have dropped out of schools. There would have been a gender impact. but people are resilient, right? And how do you see people coming out of this?
With regards to the drought, it's not only led to crop failure, but it's also led to an erosion of wealth that the farmers have been building for a while, a couple of years, by selling off their livestock. And unfortunately, most of this livestock has been sold at a relatively low price because of the increased supply, where every farmer wants to reduce their livestock or sell their livestock to supplement what income they could have been generating from crops. But then it goes beyond that, because even the farmers that use perennial streams for irrigation of small gardens have been affected because they haven't been able to irrigate and produce as much as they would in the normal years. And this, of course, has a bearing on the welfare of the farmers. In terms of resilience, most of our farmers have been through challenging times and they have come out of these challenging times. But the question is, how are they going to do it this time around? I think it's a $1 million question that needs collaborative efforts to really help the farmers to come out of this situation and access inputs for their farming season. And this is where agricultural finance, I think, comes in strongly, because most of our farmers would need some agricultural finance to be able to procure some inputs, to be able to plant and do some farming this coming season. It's an issue of how many partners and how many stakeholders are willing to come together to support farmers, be it around agricultural finance, input finance, and many other forms of finance. At Kvuno, we have a service which I did mention earlier called Malimbeo, where we give input support, input finance to the small scale farmers. And this, in a sense, gives some hope to the farmers to be able to rise. But of course, we cannot reach all the farmers, and we need a lot of effort from different stakeholders to be able to give hope to our farmers. But beyond that, it's also good for us to increase the awareness levels so that our farmers would go in with insurance in terms of producing for this year so that they avoid total loss.
Joshua, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier when you were talking about hand-holding the farmers and the use of digital tools. Could you tell us more about how you're using these digital tools to help the farmers?
At Kvuno, we have a model which we use. This is a lead farmer model where we select a lead farmer to support about 30 to 35 farmers organized in a group called a circle. And each lead farmer is equipped with a smartphone. And in turn, the lead farmers are connected with our hub agents. Of course, these hubs are located in the areas where the farmers are working. And using this smartphone, we are able to bring on board different private and also non-profit making entities to come on board and deliver and deploy their services through this. And using digital technology, we've got a WhatsApp chatbot where the farmer can ask certain questions and get certain feedback, but also just generally making access to different bundled services possible for the farmers. So, really, in a nutshell, we try to create a supportive business ecosystem which is digitally accessible to the farmers through our networks.
And what is the response of the farmers to these digital tools? How willing or able are they to use them, adopt them? Do they need a lot of training to get them on board? How does that work?
So, as I did mention earlier on, most of the smallholder farmers take time to adopt some of these new innovations. But what we've intentionally, deliberately done at Kvuno is that we've equipped our agents to support the lead farmers. And even as we provide the smartphones for our lead farmers, what we do before that is that we take them through some trainings around digital literacy so that they're able to use these facilities and they're able to access products and services on behalf of the farmers in their circle when they're requested. And in terms of the resistance to adopt, I wouldn't say we've seen a resistance to adopt. I think largely because of the digital literacy training, most of our farmers are able to pick up these services. And it's also about just bringing on board relevant services that the farmers need. One of our core values is being adaptable. So we normally tend to listen to the farmers. We try to understand their needs. And so even as we bring in services such as the incentives service, which is aimed at changing behavior, we put rewards that answer to some of the needs that the farmers have. So rewards can be in the form of knapsack sprayers, which would increase the productivity of the farmers, be it gumboots, and many other services. So once farmers see that this product or service that has been brought is answering to our needs as we communicated, there's less resistance to adopt these particular services.
And do you also, through these digital tools, connect them to markets and help them to maybe get a better source of revenue or higher margins?
We've got a product or a service that's still under development and we're still consulting that is aimed at providing a seamless offtake market for our farmers. But of course, we do interact with different market players, which come in to offtake some of the products and services that our farmers are producing. And in terms of some of our service lines where we talk about agricultural finance, we normally tend to link the farmers to the off-takers of the products that we have financed, such as soybean, potato seed, cotton seed. So we do provide that market linkage directly and through our partner, Solidaridad, Southern Africa.
I mean, two people seem to be very important. One is the lead farmers themselves, and the other are the agents. Could you tell us a little bit about what the lead farmers do? I mean, how do they interact with other farmers in their community? And could you paint for us a picture of who these agents are? Are they independent entrepreneurs? I'm sure they're trained by you in some way or the other.
Yes, indeed. For this model to work, our lead farmers are key, as well as our agents. We don't want to impose, and we do not impose who the lead farmer is for a particular circle. So what normally happens is once we register the farmers and provide them with a digital ID that has got a QR code, which can be scanned by the lead farmers to bring out specific information about the farmers, we group them in what we call circles of about 30 to 35 farmers. So the lead farmer is then in charge of helping to monitor what farming practices are being conducted by the members of the circle. So this lead farmer is selected by the members of the circle, and then the agents from Kvuno provide them with backstopping support, but also training on digital literacy. So lead farmers typically would conduct activities such as mapping the fields of their member farmers, recording when certain practices are done, such as weeding, planting, and many others. Our lead farmers are also responsible for helping farmers redeem rewards using the Zawadi system and also to place orders for certain services that we offer, such as soil testing, but also other services that are provided by the different partners that we have in our ecosystem. And then in turn, the lead farmer is supported by our agents. So our agents are typically trained by Kvuno on how to interact with the lead farmers, how to provide support, how to listen, get feedback, and communicate what the farmers are saying on the ground. But of course, beyond that, our agents are trained by different agricultural institutions for the most part. So they're qualified agriculturalists that we employ to work with and support the lead farmers, who in turn support the follower farmers in the circles.
Are these agents entrepreneurs or they are employees?
The agents are employees of Kvuno, and currently we have about 39 agents dotted across Mozambique, Zambia, and Malawi. These agents spread across 13 hubs at the moment. Yeah, so they're not your typical entrepreneur from the community, but they are employed and paid by Kvuno.
The range of services that you offer to farmers is from seeds to soil health to providing finance. Could you tell us a bit about the seeds aspect? What kinds of seeds? Where do you get them from? How do the farmers benefit?
With regards to the seeds, these are offered under a service line that we call fore, which is a local seed. In terms of accessing them, we normally tend to work with different research institutions and seed certification organizations that provide us with basic seed and things like that. Then we work with the farmers in the circles and also manage our own fields to do the multiplication. And once this is done, we are then able to resell either directly or through the agricultural financing or input financing that we have back to the farmers. So one way in which our farmers benefit is that, one, we give them agronomic training as to how to produce these commodities. We also provide them with a market, especially in the situation where they are working with us to multiply these seeds. But also, when it comes to most of the seed that we do multiply and offer to the farmers, there's been large practice of recycling seed. And with this practice, it tends to lower the production and productivity of the farmers. So by getting the certified seed with the agronomic training that's relevant for the production, we see that the farmers increase their production, and of course, at the end of the day, the profit margins that they get from their enterprises as well goes up. But in a holistic picture, it also creates wealth for the farmers because they're more productive at the end of the day.
The seeds is actually very interesting, and neither Jaideep and myself are agricultural experts. What we have been reading is that, look, there are multiple issues around seeds. So one aspect is that seeds need to be drought resistant, at the same time they should be high yielding. And then the other aspect of seeds is that intellectual property on seeds is often closely guarded. So farmers have to buy the seeds. Perhaps the earlier practice was to reuse the seeds, as you say. How are you balancing that on the ground, especially in a situation of drought like the one that you're going through?
With regards to most of the seed that's well patented, it's normally around the cereals, which are the main staples. At the moment, we are not focused on the staples, but also when we work with research institutions, we make sure we have an MOU which sort of protects the intellectual property, and we do it on a commercial basis with these institutions as Kvuno. And yes, drought-resistant seeds are needed by our farmers, so we endeavor to try to, as much as possible, provide them with varieties that would withstand climatic shocks such as droughts.
So, Joshua, thanks for telling us about seeds. Can you tell us more about how you help the farmers with soil health and financial services as well?
You can have a farmer that has got the right seed. You can have a farmer that has got the right knowledge, but different variables affect the productivity and the production of the farmers. And one of them is the soil health. It is not a common practice for most of our farmers, especially the small scale farmers, to test their soils before they produce. And so we may find a situation where farmers keep applying the recommended level of fertilizer, for instance. They're using the correct seed and following the correct agronomic practices, but then their productivity isn't increasing. And so Kvuno has got a soil testing service where we test for the pH levels, the potassium levels, phosphorus, nitrogen, the organic carbon and calcium levels. But then what this simply means is after testing a farmer's soil, we are able to recommend the crops that would ideally grow in that soil. But beyond that, if we notice that from the results of the soil test, the soils are very acidic. This means that most of the inorganic fertilizers cannot be used in those soils. And if they are applied, most of the nutrients will not be accessible by the plant. And so sometimes it's an issue of instead of applying more fertilizer, a farmer might just simply need to apply some agricultural lime, which will reduce the soil acidity and increase the available nutrients to the plants. So we try as much as possible to encourage farmers to be able to test their soils. And in addition to encouraging them, we do provide the service, which is for the most part not accessible to most farmers, but where we are, we try to provide this service. And it's not really at a commercial rate, if I may put it that way, but it's as a social enterprise, we try to use this service to help farmers increase their production and productivity. And it's sort of a lost leader in a way, but then it's something that we've seen that it is necessary for our farmers to increase their production and productivity. Then in terms of agricultural finance, we have what we call Malimbeo, which I did mention earlier on, which means money is seed. When you look at most financial institutions, the traditional financial institutions, most of them look at farmers, small scale farmers that is, as high risk in terms of getting finance because most of them are largely unbanked and there isn't much information that is available out there concerning the commercial activities and the cash flows of the farmers. And this is where Kvuno comes in because we listen to the farmers, but not only listening to the farmers, we have this database of farmers which is digitally enabled and a lot of data points are collected. So we tend to know more about our farmers than the traditional financial institutions. And we provide this service, which in a sense is not your typical financing, but provides financing in form of inputs. And the repayment for the most part is done using the output that the farmers get after producing. So most farmers find this more flexible and easier to use than the traditional systems.
Joshua, what you are describing means obviously that on the other side, other sides of the farmers, there are organizations. I know there are private organizations, there are nonprofits, what they bring to the table, how you onboard them. I think we have understood a little bit about how they can work with farmers through your digital application. But how you bring them on and who are they would be helpful for us to understand.
In terms of the partners that we work with, we have both the non-profit making non-governmental organizations such as Solidaridad, and we also have other for-profit organizations. So in terms of how we bring them on board, we listen to the voice of the farmers and what services and products they need. For instance, if we notice that farmers in Mozambique are for an output where to sell their potatoes, as Kvuno, it's in our mandate and interest to then look for off-takers for Irish potatoes and bring them on board, introduce them, and link them to these farmers. But then the onboarding process is something which follows our business development process and our sales pipeline. We run them through stages so that we ensure and understand that these are partners that are not just looking for profit, but want a long-term commercial relationship. And this commercial relationship is supposed to be both ways, where the farmers are winning and also the private entities are winning. And with regards to the non-profit making, most of them would like to see certain behaviors adopted and certain interventions that drive towards sustainability and reduction in poverty. But for the most part, it's a bit hard to monitor interventions on a day-to-day basis. And most decision makers for these organizations might have to wait until a monthly report or a quarterly report. And at times, the accuracy of those reports might be limited. So, what Kvuno does is by providing this database of farmers who are equipped with digital IDs, once a certain practice is being done by the farmers, the lead farmer then scans the QR code on the farmer's ID, and this is captured on a live basis, and it can be seen on the dashboard of the organization that is deploying that intervention. And by doing so, different organizations are able to monitor how their interventions are moving, and they do not necessarily have to wait to the end of the quarter or the end of the year in order to understand what's happening on the ground. We reduce the cost of deploying services.
Great. With these services, can you tell us a little bit about the impact? How many farmers have you worked with in any country, and how have they benefited?
In terms of impact, we have supported over 40,400 farmers directly, but indirectly, we've registered over 87,000 farmers across Zambia, Malawi, and Mozambique, as well as South Africa, but mainly Zambia, Mozambique, and Malawi. And this has helped farmers because we like to say farmers are mostly invisible, but by recording certain attributes and putting certain parameters in their digital IDs, we like to say we make them digitally visible to different organizations that want to work with them to deploy products or services. But in addition to this, Sanjoy, I think the greatest impact that I would like to say I've seen from my working with Kvuno and our farmers is that by listening to the farmers and giving them a service that answers to the needs and has been developed from using their input and also from data-driven innovations, it gives hope to the farmer to say, my voice is being heard and I'm getting a product that is answering to my needs. So the greatest, I think, impact is the hope for farmers to create wealth using their farming practices. And it's not just the hope for the farmers, but I think it goes beyond the farmers, Because when you look at countries like Zambia, we have about 70% of our labor force being employed by agriculture. So whatever we do in the agricultural space is something that goes beyond the farmer but affects the nation and the region as a whole. Because I would say for Southern Africa, agriculture is our comparative advantage.
Joshua, as you know, I'm interested in frugal innovation, how organizations can first develop solutions and then scale them affordably. So can you tell us a bit about the scale of your operations? What's your aspiration to expand this, and how will you do all that affordably?
In terms of our outreach for now, we have registered about 86,000 farmers. But in the next 5 to 7 years, our hope is to register about 250,000 farmers. And in terms of innovation development, you will agree with me that sometimes innovations and technologies are developed, but the tricky part is the deployment. And sometimes it's the most expensive part. So, what Kvuno does is using this database that has got a lot of data points, we're able to engage with the private sector players that want to interact with our farmers and give them more information about the farmers. Using our network, they're able to then deploy these services at a much cheaper rate or in a more efficient manner than they would have otherwise deployed them had they not worked with Kvuno. For instance, a private sector player that wants to deploy a certain product in a traditional sense would have to go down to the ground, mobilize farmers, interact with the traditional leadership to get their buy-in, and do this sort of foundation work, which Kvuno has already done. We've got good working relationships with not only our farmers, but also the traditional leaderships in the areas that we're working, the local authorities and different stakeholders. So it becomes cheaper for the different private sector players that we are onboarding onto our ecosystem. So with a target of 250,000 farmers in the next 5 years, this is sort of the scale of farmers which could be potentially available for a stakeholder that gets onto our ecosystem, wants to deploy their products or services to the smallholder farmers.
That's really fascinating. It's very interesting to see how you have created a digital platform, starting with the use of digital IDs and smartphones and so on. And so clearly, your whole approach to frugal development and scaling uses digital and data. And it's interesting also how you engage the larger corporates and so on. A question I have for you is about control of that data. We see these digital platforms around the world, very powerful ways of scaling, achieving efficiencies, but also concentrate a lot of power in whoever controls the data. How do you manage the control of the data, and how do you ensure that the farmers get a fair deal?
So currently we are managing this data in-house. We've noticed that access to data on the farmers and what they need, the agricultural practices and many other things is something that can benefit not only Kvuno and the partners on the ecosystem, but the greater agricultural sector in the southern region. Recently, we've been conducting some stakeholders meetings to just get inputs on how best we can develop an open data source so that different stakeholders can access not all the data, but at least some of the data that we collect. But this is, of course, something that is still under consultation. But we see a future in which it will be easier to get more information on our farmers so that we are able to improve the services and the products that we offer to the farmers to help create wealth out of their farming.
Joshua, I was thinking about climate change is not going to go away. The next drought will be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years down the line. Obviously, what you said in the beginning was that what we need is a more number of stakeholders coming and working with smallholder farmers. And of course, greater receptivity on the part of the farmers themselves to take advantage of these facilities or these services. Do you see a new urgency, or do you see a little bit of trying to kick the can down the road now that we are getting into the new planting season?
There's agency, but then with the prediction of a normal rainy season up ahead, I would have hoped to see more agency than we see, because you're coming from a drought year, Sanjoy, and then you go into a year that's okay. But beyond that, we might again go into drought years or drier rainy seasons. And as you rightly put it, climate change is here to stay. The key, I think, is innovation. We need more research into seed varieties that are drought tolerant, but also stakeholders need to embrace technologies such as solar irrigation, because it's not all the time that you can rely on rain-fed agriculture. And for most smallholder farmers, they do their farming once a year. So by embracing some of these products and services, it makes them productive throughout the year. And this would help them even in a year when they're dry season. But also with regards to policymakers, I think it's something that policymakers also need to be heavily engaged, so that we can see policies that encourage innovation, policies that encourage investment into agriculture. It's not something that can be done by one or two organizations, but it needs a lot of joint collaboration to be able to address some of these challenges. But we also need, of course, the full value chain. And by that, I mean even the consumers, because sometimes you might encourage farmers to diversify, but if you do not encourage consumers to diversify their diet or their consumption patterns, then it's hard for the market to be created for the farmers. For instance, sorghum is one commodity in the southern region that was grown traditionally, and it is a drought tolerant crop. But over the years, it's been surpassed by maize. And even on the consumption part, most of our countries in the southern region use maize as their staple. It's about developing policies that would encourage consumption of a diverse range of cereals. And this would encourage the farmers because they're able to see a market out there, and they would grow more drought tolerant crops. There's no silver bullet, but it's about putting efforts together, putting ideas together, and helping to create this ecosystem that supports the farmers and supports everyone at the end of the day. One thing that I would like to add to my background is, for the most part, I've grown up in the urban setting, but I have had an opportunity to learn and live in a rural setup. And I've gone to school with some of the most brilliant people that I've met. But unfortunate, because there's limited wealth that our smallholder farmers are able to create from agriculture. Most of them were not able to advance in terms of their education and ended up settling in the rural communities. Nothing wrong about settling in the rural communities, I must say, but if it limits the potential to develop those communities, then there's something wrong about that. And so this was one of the key drivers that has led me to work in the agricultural sector and also try to support our farmers to create wealth. So in as much as I'm professionally trained for this, I've also experienced something that is personal and something that I would like to address, and that is having farmers generate real and sustainable wealth from their farming.
And we have come to the end of the podcast, Joshua. And if people want to get in touch with you, how should they?
They can visit our website. That's www.kvuno.io. You can also visit our Facebook, Twitter, as well as Instagram handles. But through the website, they'll be able to reach out to us. Our contact details, I believe, should be there.
And thank you very much, Joshua. It was wonderful talking to you.
Thank you so much, Joshua. Indeed, a wonderful conversation.
Thank you very much as well. It's been a great opportunity and a great pleasure to be part of the podcast.